The honourable member for Halifax-Needham, both the paper and the electronic quote that you used. The honourable member for Halifax-Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak to Bill 203, an act respecting the labour relationship between Her Majesty in right of the province and Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia Crown Attorneys Association. It's interesting to me how much time we are spending, kind of focusing on words. But words do have to have meaning. Words have to have meaning. And it's part of being human, and also being human and organizing ourselves with other humans to try to come to agreements, that inevitably we use words to mediate our meeting. And so that is, I think, why this act is so egregious, because it is, and I don't think this is on the list of unparliamentary terms, it is disingenuous. It is disingenuous. It falls short of sincere. I'm going to talk a little bit, think a little bit about the relationship word in the title of this bill. We form relationships, even going back to our earliest relationships, mother and child, our romantic relationships. We form them by making agreements. This is okay. I don't like it when you do this. I agree to this. I consent to this. I don't consent to this. This is not all right. I have to read one provision of this bill, which just, I think, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not the best at actually understanding the bills that we debate sometimes. And I have to force myself to actually read every provision and to try to, understand the meaning of what we are talking about in this chamber. But this is Clause 8, Part 2. It says, the amendment of the framework agreement, and that's the framework agreement that was from 2012 until 2046. The amendment of the framework agreement under subsection 1 applies notwithstanding the requirement for mutual consent in section 22 of the framework agreement. This is legislation which is saying we are amending something that was negotiated and agreed to for a period of 30 years, notwithstanding the requirement for mutual consent. How do you maintain a relationship? How do you continue a relationship when you disrespect agreements? When you say this agreement that we made together, that we codified, that we negotiated, and then we put into language, and we said this is the framework. This is how we are going to move forward together. How does that relationship continue after that, when that is legislated? And honestly, I find it offensive that this legislature is being asked to play a role in breaking agreements, because that's what this is. It is legislating the breaking of an agreement. Crown attorneys are public servants. They are a special category of public servants because they are so core to the function of our justice system. And yet they also form a part of the public service. And so in that way, they are analogous to so many other members in our public service who have had the relationship strained and broken with the government of Nova Scotia under this government. And that goes back to 2014 and Bill 37, which affected the healthcare sector, and Bill 100 in 2015, where universities were allowed to ban strikes, and Bill 148 affecting a broad swath of the public sector, and of course Bill 75 with the teachers, and it's gone on and on, and frankly, when I hear details which honestly I should not be privy to. I should not be privy to the details of the negotiation between the Crown attorneys and their association and the government. But when I hear that at the bargaining table, the parties were so far apart, I have to question whether this government is not reaping what it has sown. Because really, having negotiated a 30-year framework agreement, why would any group of public servants at this time not want to resort to an arbitrator of good reputation? Because the faith, like entering into a negotiating process, into a collective bargaining process with this government is already hamstrung by this government's own track record of how public servants have been treated. I am grateful, and I think all Nova Scotians have to really reflect on this. I am grateful that so many of our public servants also have such a strong relationship with Nova Scotians. Healthcare workers, nurses, doctors have relationships with their patients. Teachers have relationships with their students and with those students' parents. And crowns have relationships. They have relationships with victims of crime. They have relationships with, all of us as a society who, even though we may not be aware of it, depend on their work for some measure of our own security. And I'd say even that crowns have relationships with members, with Defense Counsel and with people who are accused and convicted. They have those relationships, and as my colleague from Dartmouth South pointed out, they have a relationship with their own ethics and their own relationship to their work and to their internal sense of the importance of their work, to their own integrity. And so I'm grateful for that, because it is the weight of those relationships and the health of those relationships that has been tested and is being tested by the continuous degradation of the relationship between the government of Nova Scotia and public servants. And so that is the cost that all of us are bearing as yet another round of this government's bargaining kind of comes unraveled, doesn't reach the conclusion that it should, because it's not pursued in the way that it should be pursued. I have not been at a bargaining table, but I imagine it a little bit like a roadmap that the team that is bargaining has a vision of where they are, where they would like to go, and what the different routes are that they can get there. And again, speaking to the cost of this government's repeated pattern of behavior, I think it's fair to say that the route that involves negotiation with this government must seem like, kind of one of those like dotted lines where you have to go look at the legend. How bad is that road? I don't know how many classes of roads we have in Nova Scotia. I'm one of the very few MLAs that doesn't have bunch of provincial roads in my constituency, but I'm like, if there's something below a J-class road, that is what the road would be to getting to that destination. L for liberal. L for liberal, my leader says. And then there's this road of arbitration with someone else who also has a sense of personal and professional integrity. You know, the fact that that road is available influences where you go over that kind of rough road that is on the map. And this legislation is akin to saying to the person or to the bargaining team in this metaphor on the journey, oh, you know what? All those roads are actually dead ends. Yeah. You're already on the journey. You've already put in the time. You've already packed your bags, envisioned the destination, and now all of a sudden the roadmap is not a roadmap. It's like, well, I guess it's like a GPS, which is like updating, and all of a sudden you find that the journey you're on is actually not even possible. That is how I think that this word might just be a Newfoundlandism, discombobulating this piece of legislation is. It's like, nope, you thought you were doing something, that isn't even possible. I appreciate one or both of my colleagues, or several of my colleagues, using the word framing to talk about this legislation. The fact that it was tabled as a bill from finance is an attempt to frame, essentially to tell a story to Nova Scotians about what this is. And this government, and I don't know how common this is. I think maybe I didn't pay so much attention before I was actually elected to office. This government in particular, though, I think, frames different sorts of expenditures very differently. This government frames expenditures that are related to the labor of people as an expense. And it frames expenditures that are related to the acquisition of goods or the building of infrastructure as investments. They're both expenditures. They're both expenditures. And as my colleague from Cape Breton Centre points out, frankly, when you spend on investments, when you actually have investments or assets like hospitals, or even when you plan to spend on investments like hospitals, they're no good without people. And not just any people, people with real skills, people who feel like they are on your team collectively providing public service to Nova Scotians. And those people are not widgets that you can substitute out. They accumulate knowledge and experience and their own relationships with the people that they serve directly. And frankly, for the finance minister to stand up with, this is very serious, I'm talking like the responsible grown-up in the room, and say that, I'm not sure if it was 54 or 55 or 57% of the expenditures of Nova Scotia is on the public service. Frankly, I'm surprised it's so little. I'm surprised it's so little because they are doing the work of government. They are doing the work of government. I've worked in nonprofit organizations, and mind you, maybe we're a little bit stingier about, how many paper clips you buy and a whole bunch of other things, because there's literally no money to go around. But often nonprofits spend 90% of their expenditures, and 90% plus on labor, because the most important work that we do is actually only possible through the skill and the work of people. And to categorize and to frame that as an expense that is somehow like egregious or irresponsible is really it's mistaken. It's not accurate. I mean, because not only are those people providing public service, but also the income that they make is how they take care of their families. It's how they spend money in our communities. It's, yeah, I mean, anyhow. So that framing, so there are multiple ways that this has been framed, that we have told ourselves a story, or no, that this government has told a story about this bill which is disingenuous. And I reject those stories, and I hope that it is some consolation, not just to the Crown attorneys who are here listening to this debate, but also to all the other public servants about whom stories have been told, where they are framed as irresponsible or egregious or outlandish expenses for the government of Nova Scotia. I hope it's some consolation that we actually do understand what the real story is, because we do understand the story, and I think that story will be told about this particular government and the particular pattern of behavior of this government. And this is I would say the sad and the latest chapter. Thank you very much.